A few years ago, I was out at a flea market looking for games when I found a vendor with some boxed SNES stuff. I don't know what it was about this lady with a short sword and some cards glued to her hand, but I was immediately curious to know more about this game. Unfortunately, the box art lady never made an appearance, but the story does follow the trials of a young man named Rooks, the very last in a line of sorcerers known as the Cardmasters. The legend of the Cardmasters describes how they used their magic to overcome the evil regime of Rimsala to bring peace to the land long ago. After a time, the people of Six Kingdoms started warring with one another for power, which plunged the entire region into a time of unrest. This created an opening for a corrupt fellow named Galneon to overthrow the ruling king and assume the throne for himself, with plans to unseal Rimsala and release her evil back into the world once again. With his parents long dead and nobody around to train him to use his Cardmaster powers, it's up to Rooks to unlock their secrets to prevent the world from imminent doom. What makes this game stand out among other RPGs is its very particular visual style. Nearly all plot-related characters, as well as all of the enemies you'll encounter, are actually cards. You don't play as someone who controls them, but rather the cards themselves and the characters they represent are sentient, living, and breathing entities that roam around and fulfill the many motions of the plot. I found it confusing that Rooks is supposed to be a card master, but is actually a card himself, along with so many of his comrades. Nothing in the manual or the game ever explained why this is the case, nor was it ever revealed why there are so many other people in this realm that aren't cards at all. Shop and innkeepers look to be perfectly normal people standing behind a counter. All said though, it was an intriguing choice that left me with a lot more questions than answers. I didn't feel that this design aspect added anything significant to the experience other than some slight visual interest. Apart from your spirit elemental party members getting torn in half when they're killed in battle, nothing's really uniquely card-centric. Honestly, interactions with some of these characters were just bizarre. There are quite a few story cutscenes that come up along the way, and watching a card person shuffle into the room and update me on someone's critical injuries, or threaten my life before battle was always hilarious. It brought an unintentional lightheartedness to what is in reality a very somber plot, which I don't feel was a strength for the game. The translation to English from Japanese wasn't great. To be clear, it was good enough that I never felt disadvantaged in what the main story beats were or what my main goal was at any point, but there was absolutely no nuance in the writing. Characters were passionately literal in their outbursts, which were sometimes laugh-out-loud funny. I'm someone that really loves an RPG with a solid story to build up the experience as a whole, and while I'm sure that there was a good one in there somewhere, I felt the shaky translation really hurt the delivery. There were many moments that would have probably been a lot more impactful with a more carefully crafted script. It also seemed to get worse the further into the game I got, which made me wonder if the pressures of development timelines may have left the back end of this one less polished than the beginning. I have heard that there's a patch available that tidies up the translation and fixes a plethora of other things for those of you that are interested in that experience, though I ended up playing the original cartridge. The game rolls out over multiple chapters that see you and your party traveling around the lands of Elemen and confronting the many faces of Galneon's opposing forces. The party complement always consists of Rooks and his companion spirit cards, as well as one or two other people that you meet along the way. Those other two slots are more or less a revolving door since allies join and leave you almost constantly and often unexpectedly. Considering how many different people you fight alongside here, I was appreciative of how almost every major character had a bio in the manual to read up on. These revealed a little about who each person's related to, who they're friends with, and what their history is with other characters. Given how disjointed the translation was, these excerpts filled me in on many details that I never saw addressed in the game directly, and helped to provide a little bit of cohesion that was lost in the language blunders. Arcana has a really quirky feature that I don't think I've ever experienced in another game before. When characters join you, even if they were just fighting a monster horde and were clearly equipped in the cutscene, they come into your party with no armor or weapons. I remember picking up Darwin for the first time and eyeballing his level, which was higher than my other characters at that point in the story. I breathed a sigh of relief to have someone else along with me since I was getting wrecked left and right. But when he started swinging at monsters in battle, he was doing a pitiful amount of damage. When I went to check out what equipment he had on, it turned out he wasn't wearing anything at all. This is just as inconvenient as it sounds, and continued to be throughout the game as people came and went. allies rarely seem to enlist in your cause in convenient places where you can easily outfit them. Usually, I'd be deep into a maze exploring and suddenly find myself with a new party member thrust upon me. It's not as if all characters can interchange weapons and armor freely either, so if you don't happen to have an extra set of compatible equipment in your inventory ready to go for them, they likely won't serve as much more than a punching bag for a little while. I'll talk more about why this is so risky later, but for the moment, I need to point a finger at the manual for suggesting discarding or selling unwanted equipment. I mean, yeah, if you're running out of space or something, that's an understandable thing to do. But anyone who reads that and decides to dump everything as soon as they upgrade near the beginning of the game is just being set up to fail as soon as someone in their underwear approaches them to join their quest. Thankfully, my hoarding tendencies saw me through a couple of rough spots, but even still, there were a few times I had to retreat to town to buy new stuff for a new friend. On the bright side, at least when someone leaves your party, they're kind enough to turn in their weapon and all their clothes before sneaking off, with those items automatically returning to your inventory. I adored this, since I'm always lamenting over characters that permanently leave in other games. It's hard to say goodbye to all of those wasted, rare, one-time stat-boosting items or fancy new garb I splurged on for them. Arcana at least gave me the option to sell that stuff if I wanted to, though I mostly hung on to the character-specific items for the reasons I just mentioned. Now, I can't stress enough how important it is to have the manual handy while playing through Arcana. Making informed equipment purchases would have been virtually impossible without the information there, since the in-game descriptions were mainly nonsense. They didn't really describe anything important about the items. All of the stats and features were spelled out in the instructions, but as thorough as that was, it still wasn't a perfect solution. There's one page where it seems like the entire attribute column is off by one row. For example, it wasn't too hard to tell that the ice blade should do water damage, but according to this chart it didn't, and nothing above it did. It got especially complicated when sword names were things like Desiree, Crystal, or Spirit. I had no idea what cool things those were supposed to be imbued with, making it hard to trust the information laid out here completely. One aspect of shopping I did like was how the menus told you who could wear different things, so you didn't blow the bank buying something that someone in your current party couldn't use. It was also nice that the spirit card characters didn't need any equipment because, put simply, everything is really expensive. Keeping up with the shiniest new armaments was honestly challenging. It's not that money is scarce or anything, and it's not as if battles are hard to come by to grind up the funds. But when you're planning for so many allies that rotate in and out so often, the money that you make only takes you so far. Eventually, you can even start buying stat-boosting items that permanently raise your offense, defense, HP, and MP in stores in town. If you have the cash, you can very easily outpace many of the gains that leveling through conventional means would normally give you. Money really is the key to winning, and spending it smartly is essential to playing the game well. The bulk of the adventure is spent exploring increasingly massive mazes from the first-person perspective. If you're a graph paper mapping fanatic, you might be disappointed to learn that the game actually does all of that hard work for you. You can still do it yourself if you want to, of course, but I feel that one of Arcana's best features is that it automaps every step you take, and the maps are free to consult at any time. My one comparator here is Shining in the Darkness, which is another first-person perspective dungeon crawler for the Sega Genesis that I played a few years back. In that one, you have to cast a spell to access your map every time. It only costs 1 MP to do so, but I much prefer Arcana's free access. These maps even show you where stairwells are located, though you'll probably still want to take some notes about which ones lead to which sections of the dungeon, especially later on in the game when these places get to be pretty elaborate. This is definitely one of those adventures where I couldn't bear to leave even a single dead end unexplored. There's plenty of stuff to find, like the usual items you can buy in town, as well as special equipment you couldn't find anywhere else. The thing about the perspective here is that you couldn't just turn a corner and glance down a hallway from afar to see if there was a chest over there. You had to walk all the way up to the wall at the dead end for it to appear, if it was even there at all. There's also a part of me that compulsively needs to fill in every square of my maps, and I reaped many spoils for my extra efforts in doing so. One thing I was grateful for was how the areas you explore change up their music and scenery quite often. While there were still many different bricks I had to stare at for hours, there were also carpeted hallways and even forests to traverse. The music is also amazing from start to finish. I can't say enough how fitting every track is, whether you're wandering through a dungeon, in town, or in the struggles of a boss battle. All of it emanates a sense of ambience that puts this game's music up there with some of the best RPG experiences on the console. That's big praise, and Arcana deserves it. Combat occurs entirely through random battles. To say that the encounter rate is high would be an understatement, though it wasn't always terrible. There were times when I could make it pretty far without triggering a single fight, while others I would run into them every couple of steps. I always enjoy a higher encounter rate since every victory is a step towards a new level, but I can understand why some people would find it excessive in this case. It's really no worse from other RPGs that were released around this time. The battle screen setup was lovely, especially the enemy portraits. There aren't really a ton of different creatures to fight since there are quite a few palette swaps, but every monster group had their own unique animations. I especially adored how cool the flapping robes on warlocks and their derivatives were, but the various wiggles and wobbles from the rest were also pretty cool. Even each party member had a battle stance that was different from their regular headshot mode that you see while exploring. The extra effort on these small details definitely made staring at these encounters every other minute much more endearing than other RPGs from around the same time. There was one thing that I never seemed to figure out completely during my playthrough, and that was whether character formations actually mattered. The manual only has a couple of lines that describe keeping stronger characters at the front as best practice, but then they never bothered to mention which side was the front. I tried a whole bunch of different combinations and moved people all around to try to measure differences in their attack and defense to no avail. If anyone has any insights on this, I'd love to hear more about it in the comments. Anyway, Arcana's big battle feature is the exploitation of elemental weaknesses of your enemies to gain an advantage. Most monsters are affiliated with one of 4 elemental attributes that's shown by the color of their card border. This handy little diagram in the manual aimed to explain how each of the categories affects the others, but just like the equipment list, there's a major error here too. The big arrow in the middle between the fire and earth elements should go in both directions, since as it's written, fire would have a clear advantage over all other elements. In reality, there's no one type of magic that's better than the rest, but thankfully it didn't take me too long to figure that out. Even if this seems like a really simplistic system on the surface, it was still an effective one that kept battles intense. It was pretty rare to run into a group of enemies that were strictly of one elemental type, forcing very thoughtful approaches to fend off mixed groups. The spirit cards were absolutely crucial. Individual party members learned quite a few element-based magic spells as they leveled up, but the spirit cards could unleash very effective high-level spells for their respective affiliation, and they were able to regain MP simply by walking around between encounters. I tended to use party member magic for buffing and debuffing the party, healing, and occasionally for offensive purposes if my spirit cards were dwindling in MP. The 11 attribute spells were another great set of magic-based tools. They targeted different combinations of elements and were perfect for complex enemy combos, but I didn't use them very often. They come with a relatively high MP cost, and because not everyone learns every attribute spell, you don't always have the one you need on hand to deal with a unique problem you might be facing. It also didn't help that the naming convention for the spell group felt impossible to memorize, so when it came to magic, I stuck mostly to using my spirit card characters, or regularly named spells instead. I will say that even though my party complement was always changing, I was never without the ability to do the basics like heal or cast those buffs and debuffs that I liked. I appreciated that every ally was valuable in their own way by having a unique magic slate that they could wield, but also had overlap where it counted. Nearly every party member could heal to some extent, and while I don't love a party full of characters that all do exactly the same thing, healing is one exception to that rule for me. When the going gets tough, you can't do much if you're dead. Another cool magic-based feature in Arcana is the assortment of one-time use element cards. These provide rooks with a couple of different attack options, and the cards can be found or bought in most towns. As cool as they were though, I didn't rely too heavily on these because you could only carry up to 9 of them at once. In a single battle, to do any kind of meaningful damage, you'd need to stack 3 of them per a single turn, meaning that inside of a single fight, you could burn through your entire card stack and not have anything left for the billion fights yet to come. With such a heinous encounter rate, it was much more effective to hammer down on monsters with my regular weapons instead. I will say that there are some really great cards worth carrying, like the ones that allow you to run from battle without fail, or potentially unleash some really powerful damage by summoning a spirit. Unfortunately though, many of the regular elemental ones were underwhelming at best. I put my money that they would have cost me towards other things instead. Status effects were exceptionally nasty here. Things like paralysis and petrify could severely impact my chances of winning a battle, but nothing, absolutely nothing, was worse than sleep. In other RPGs, when one of your characters has a mid-battle snooze, they're usually either awakened the next time they're hit, or at the very worst, not too many turns after the initial plunge into unconsciousness. Here though, I often went through entire bouts without waking up again, and if Rooks got put to sleep, it was a major problem. Many other party members, including the spirit cards, have extremely weak physical offensive attacks. Even with the best weapons, many of them can't pack a punch nearly as well as Rooks can. With him down for the count, battles were much longer and harder to work through, and that's only if everyone else didn't get put to sleep too. While cruising through the dungeons, certain types of enemies never failed to make all of the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Whenever I ran into these ghost dudes, they put me out immediately in battle. There was never any guarantee that I would come out on the other side of a fight with them. Even amidst all the grappling, the one thing I did find absolutely hilarious was that even while dreaming away, characters would still yell taunts at their enemies. Imagining somebody dead asleep exclaiming, "Is that the best you can do?" between snores while wicked battle music wailed on was too much. I loved it. In terms of the difficulty, Arcana had some pretty ridiculous spikes in hard-to-predict places. First of all, in a single huge maze, you could be completely destroying your adversaries 1 minute, but then suddenly stumble into a fight that cuts you off at the knees because you dared to turn down a new hallway. Monsters seem to be location-based inside of each labyrinth you explore, with invisible thresholds determining what kinds of monsters spawn in different sections. I lost count of the number of times I got caught off guard by an unexpected fatal encounter, which was complicated even further by a huge problem with dying that I've never seen outside of Arcana. If any of your human characters die, you get an instant game over. Not dumped out into town to try again with less money or some other penalty, but straight back to the title screen with all of your progress after your last save lost forever. Did I mention that you can only save in town? And remember how I mentioned that party members often join with no equipment during plot-related events deep inside a dungeon that can't possibly be anticipated in advance? Yeah. If they take too many hits with nothing to protect themselves, your whole party is done for. It was mostly on those occasions, or ones where I stumbled into a random boss fight in the middle of nowhere, that decimated my entire party and cost me hours of progress. Now, you might think that this would have infuriated me, but you'd be wrong. Even though I did find it annoying when it happened, there was something very alluring to me around the risk versus reward aspect of the gameplay. Not all first RPG playthroughs keep me on edge quite as much as Arcana did, and there's something really exciting to me about that kind of palpable threat. I really haven't felt this since I played the 7th Saga a few years ago. In Arcana, there was so much to lose by pressing on a little too far ahead, trying to stretch out my resources too thinly, or being tempted by the end of just one more hallway before warping out to recoup at the inn and save. I couldn't help but take a few wallopings between my victories just out of sheer curiosity, and when I finally did get the wins, they felt extra deserved and rewarding because I finally figured out how to play my cards right. I can't say that I always had unwavering bravery with several hours past my last save point on the line. Just in case I decided to chicken out, I always kept 8 MP handy for the home spell that Rooks can use to warp back to town. I tried not to do this too often because there aren't any checkpoints in the mazes. Retreating to town means that you'll have a very long walk ahead to get back to where you were, which almost seemed intended later on in the game to pad your party with some extra levels. Overall, I thought Arcana was a good enough experience. It has quite a bit of punch for a game in a genre that's known to be extremely tedious and measured, but there are a few things that I felt held it back from achieving true greatness. For one, its translation's unintentional humor made the story a lot less captivating than it should have been. Secondly, I also wish there could have been more party stability so that I could have planned things out a bit better. I know the plot strictly follows a straight line from beginning to end, with these complement changes usually driving the story along, but just when things would get interesting with someone, they'd be gone again for another few hours. And thirdly, there's the challenge factor. This is certainly not a casual RPG experience, since Arcana's difficulty could be best described as a roller coaster. It has lots of slow climbs and steep drops that make the pacing feel inconsistent, with pretty dire consequences for the unprepared. Even still though, the auto-mapping was amazing, the elemental combat mechanics are sound in their execution, there's a fun-a-ton secrets to find, and there's a fantastic soundtrack to keep you company the whole way along. If you're a dungeon crawler enjoyer and haven't played this one yet, it will definitely hit the spot.